whether it's about China's threat to the U.S. or possible or potential threat to the U.S. Right? We open to maybe there's no threat. Well, I'll present to you my case. Now the other way around, we're not talking about the U.S. possible potential threat to China, but only China to the U.S. So my approach to this is two tracks. One is an independence track. The second one is a development track. Actually, I would like to start with the second one, development track. The development track. We'll start with Obama. Well, you saw that Obama is stepping down the valley of the Air Force One with the bare stairs. He's the one. He said, if China develops like America, this planet doesn't stand a chance. Granted, he said it in the context of about global warming, climate, and environment issue, but I think it's relevant to our topic because our topic is geopolitical and economic. So if China develops like the US, what's the impact to the world? So it's probably not stand a chance. So here comes the threat. If China develops like the US, would it be a threat to other countries, especially the countries that are already there? There's a newcomer who wants to develop like your level. Would that be good for those countries? Would they consider it as a threat? So give you a sense of proportion about a disparity in development. China currently, the GDP is $20.85 trillion. That's based on the first quarter 2026, adjusted for the whole year. And China's current GDP per capita is $14,870. And the US current GDP is $31.856 trillion. And the per capita is $94,430. So you can see China's GDP is 2/3 of the US, but China's per capita is a fraction of the US, 94 versus just under $50,000. You know why? Because China's population 4 times US population. So for China to get to from 14 to 94, it's a long way. It's a long way. This is sustainable. So let's lower the standard, because the development country, the country to be classified as the developed country, the world economists, the consensus about 25,000, between 25 to 30,000. So let's make 30,000 as a whole number, is easier to handle. This thing is called middle income trap. It's a trap that a underdeveloped country improved into a developing country, but it's not able to go further up to become a developed country. We have a lot of those countries. For example, Brazil, India, Turkey, South Africa, possibly China. China is fully aware of it, I'm sure, the leadership, and they don't want to be stuck there. Because the Communist Party is it's a party state. They cannot stay there and still have a legitimacy to be the sole party of the state. That's why they do their best not to stay there, as opposed to a democratic country. Well, if we lose our legitimacy, people don't like us, we lose the election, and the next election maybe we'll be able to come back. But in China's case, it's more severe than that. If you lose the legitimacy, you lose the regime power forever. Maybe there's a revolution. So it's much more consequential. So to unstuck, China will try to export more and grow their domestic demand as well. So far, China developed to the point that it has. Its vast majority is attributed to their export. That's their model so far. They realize it's not sustainable for the longer term or far in the future, so they have started to develop their domestic demand, like stimulation or just to boost their domestic demand. So they can 2 cycles. They don't have to rely solely on exports because exports, you meet with a lot of resistance, because some countries, they don't like it. They think you're practicing trade unfairly, you're affecting their job, employment or unemployment numbers. So you face a lot of issues. So they try to hedging, or it's not so much hedge. It's a healthy economy should not solely depend on exporting for their growth. So they try to do the other cycle, which is domestic demand. But we can see they just start doing it. I haven't seen a lot of success because of other circumstances. So we can see exports will still be important for the foreseeable future. So that means when you export, the countries that import face competition. At least their workforce, their companies will face competition. Well, the consumers like it because competition between companies, consumer will benefit from better prices and from better quality. But the companies, the employment will have to work harder. So Europe, for example, Europe, they you probably heard those European countries, EU countries, or more advanced EU countries, the workers have 3 months vacation for each year, and they work 4 days a week or something. But now facing this extra competition from China, they're going to have to work harder. They can probably go back to 5 days a week, or cut their vacation to 1.5 months. So that's kind of threatens it. If I were put yourself in the Europeans' shoes, you will feel threatened. But the thing is, you don't have to. As Americans, you don't have to put yourself in Europeans' shoes, because in America, I don't think Americans are willing, or even though they have to work harder than 5 days a week now. We work 5 days a week, probably 2-3 weeks, a meager 2-3 weeks vacation each year. Americans probably can work harder than that to face competition. They just lose their jobs. We'll make American workers just lose their jobs to countries like China, right? When they have a stronger developed manufacturing sector. But China will have to keep developing to maintain a party state, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So they can't stop. And it's very hard, because let me give you a sense of proportion one more time. Even though you get Europe's GDP, which is $23 trillion, EU, if China wins big, will take over the whole EU economy. It wins big. It takes full $23 trillion. The Europeans eat your EU's lunch totally. So EU will have $0 left. China will have the whole $23 trillion. That only raised China's per capita GDP to $31,321. I don't think Chinese people will be happy about it long term. Even though it's extremely hard, it's impossible, right? It's impossible to have Chinese to eat a lunch for all Europeans, all the EU citizens. They can only get to the Croatia level. Croatia's at 30,000. So at 31,000, it's impossible to achieve, but it's not nearly enough for the long term. So we'll do another one. If U.S. is China totally killed U.S. economy, they won everything. The U.S. lunch, China's eating U.S. lunch totally, right? That only raised the Chinese per capita GDP to $37,000, $647. That's still not very good. Look at U.S. is over $94,000 right now. It's not really good. That's like Lithuania's level, which is between $35,000 to $40,000. It's not really good, and it's impossible, right? So what's possible. That's even farther from good or satisfactory. Another way to look at it. The airplane sector, like Boeing and Airbus, or chip, NVIDIA, the whole sector, or automobile sector, you know, Ford, Chrysler, or Volkswagen, or Toyota, and BMW, Mercedes. China's one big, let's say China's one big in the whole automobile sector, chip sector, semiconductor, and airplane sector. All Chinese. That will only increase Chinese per capita GDP by $1,500. That will bring the per capita GDP to $16,000, 370 cents. That's not even developed country. That's still in the what's it called, middle income track. So, and that's impossible, is it? I know there are other sectors, but realistically, that's not doable, at least in the short or medium term. So China, the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, will have to pursue relentless development. It's going to be like a forever, perpetual developing country, perpetual government, development-oriented government for I don't know how long. They can't stop. They stop, their legitimacy will slide away. I don't think they like to see that. So that's a threat to the U.S. because the U.S. loses jobs. Europeans have to work harder and lose jobs too. That's a threat, but I would say argue it's a passive threat because there's no one points a gun to your head. There's no violence, right? For China to export each car, let's say, someone will have to place that order. So although the end result, some people, parts of the population won't like that result, which means the governments of those receiving end countries will not like it. So they will consider it a threat, understandably, but it's the kind of threat that's a passive threat. It's not violence, it's so blunt. Right? So that's what I have to say about this development track. So it's a threat, it's a passive threat. What about the independence track? China is actually dependent on the US. Why? Because 1971, Nixon, Kissinger went to China. And then Nixon, that same year, I don't know which came first, but it must have been on his mind, so it doesn't matter which one came first. He had his mind, I want to take US dollar off gold standard, and I want to visit China, right? So he took dollar off gold standard, he has to have something else to base it on, to maintain the reserved currency status, to maintain the demand for that US dollar. So he had a petrodollar arrangement with GCC states. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE just recently dropped out of the OPEC. But the petrodollar replaces gold to continue to make the US dollar a reserve currency of the world. And that's not enough. How about the manufacturing sector? So they went to China. They went to China, started a political relationship, then bring China back into the global economy. So China will be the factory of the world. And whatever China sells, whatever China buys, the China sells, exports, only in US dollars. While China imports the material, the input to their manufacturing sector, and the energy they need to manufacture, to make things, also they have to pay in US dollars. So that's two prongs to maintain US dollars reserve currency status. And China was expected to manufacture low-end, low-value-added kind of goods, like cheap toys and cheap T-shirts, clothes, that kind of goods. And by doing that, China was glad from so poor they couldn't even afford their own pants, right? They're nothing to eat. They're like in a poverty borderline or below poverty, depends on which section of the population you're looking at. It's really, really abject poverty as a nation. They're certainly glad to be included into the global economy, so they have a chance to improve their fortune. But they started very low, like low-end goods, manufactured goods. And their students went to the US to study. And the best ones are not returning to China. They come to US to study science, technology, and they stay. And the youth hear those nice stories. The government will make sure everyone knows. They put it on the media. Certain excellent, brilliant Chinese students coming back from the US, from other developed countries, nice university. They contribute a lot to China's advancement in science and technology. But they put it out there because it's rare. Because the fact is, most good ones don't come back. Or I should say, don't go back, right? There's always that thing. So that's another way the US is leading China. China is dependent on the US. The Chinese people, the mind, US has Chinese people's mind, hearts and minds. When they want to study, they go to the US. When they have the ability, they have the means, they have the brains, they will go to US. They won't just stay in China. For the most part. And then institution-wise, US dominated and drive the US institution like WTO, World Bank, IMF. And China will join. China will gladly join and benefit from it. And this US dominated. US driven. If you look at the charter, they look at the capital composition in World Bank, IMF, you look at those judges in WTO, now they're gone, it's different. I'm talking about the previous era. It's all US. And China gladly joined. They think it's a privilege. So how dependent China is on the US, right? And when China does something the US doesn't like, it's always there. US doesn't have to say it. US can sanction China. US can, and it did, right? Turns out it did, especially since 2018. And once US sanctioned China, China is hurt. And the capital flight occurred in a grand scale when trade war started. And hasn't come back. It's like a pretty bad situation. It's aggravated, it got exacerbated with COVID. Right? It started with the sanction in 2018 trade war. Biden continued on it, and the COVID. So China really, they're not saying it, but people know they're struggling. Well, they can get by, but they'd rather be in a better situation. And when push comes to shove, it's also unspoken, but everybody knows. U.S. has the strongest navy in the history of mankind. And they're fully able to block all the chokeholds. If they don't want to punish China, they can choke China out. They can block, what's the one by Spain?
Gibraltar.
Gibraltar. They can block Panama Canal. They can block Suez Canal.
Maybe the Strait of Malacca too.
Malacca, and maybe South China Sea if they can get into it. Now China's getting stronger, but those are choke points. Right? They can block Hormuz as well. So China is dependent on U.S. China fears U.S. for good reasons. And the most sinister part, the part I really don't like to see, is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party cadres, those officials. They have personal assets or family assets in the U.S. that they stole. It's because of corruption. They have that in the U.S. buying real estate, or on Wall Street buying financial assets. See, those people, their interest is actually in the US, not in China. Their interest, their family interest, including those high-level military officials, those generals. So if there's a conflict to US economy-wise, political, or your military, whose side are they going to be on? For example, they're not going to say, well, like a soldier, right? Soldiers, the loyalty is demanded, it's expected. You have to make it clear at all times. They're not going to say, well, hey, I have a house in California, Los Angeles, right? Like the guy just got charged and convicted corruption. One of the former defense secretary, who was a general. In China, defense secretary is not a civilian job. They have active general as defense secretary. The two of them, but I know it just came out. One of them got his son. His son got money, corrupt the money they stole, because corruption. They bought a house. He couldn't. I guess the U.S. gave him the money. Corruption. The report didn't have the details. Probably the money is from the U.S. U.S. somehow bribed the defense secretary of China. And the son was elated, calling his father, hey, we got the house, we got the money, we got the house in, like a villa, it's not like a regular house, in Los Angeles. Right? So that general, when there's a conflict, he will persuade Xi Jinping, say, well, we better not take action on U.S. troops, on U.S. fleet. We're not ready, and U.S. is too strong. We should pursue peace. Because his judgment will be skewed. Because he doesn't want to fight U.S. Because U.S. gave him money. Or he has assets. Others may have assets in the U.S. U.S. can easily freeze their assets. So that's what I mean by sinister. And we all know, well, you may know, that also, let me add one more thing, because China is integrated into global economy, so the U.S. is able to tell other countries to not do business, to sanction China. So if U.S. sanctions China, and other countries will have to comply. That's called secondary sanction. Otherwise, they're sanctioned. They themselves are sanctioned. So, the first business that when Xi Jinping got in office, 2012, is his corruption campaign. Xi Jinping himself, I believe, is not corrupt. He's not corrupt, and he had very few officials to rely on in this campaign, anti-corruption campaign. But he's trying to do it. He's been doing the best of his ability, and it's still going on. Since 2012, it's not easy. It's like a systemic issue, and he had very few people to rely on. But he had to be very strong. He had to be a strong leader. That's why people call him like a Mao Zedong. He had to execute this kind of campaign. You cannot be like Wen Jiabao. It cannot be like Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. They themselves are corrupt. Their family, look at their sons. So Xi Jinping has to be strong. You know, the side effect will be people will say, well, you're like Mao Zedong. You're not giving people enough political rights, right? So it's two sides of the same coin. But he is doing try to uproot the corruption, so China can be independent from the U.S. Of course, you would say that's not the only thing, right? There are other things too. 2022, they passed a law. It's called. Let me find the name of it. I can find the name very quickly. It's a law, anti-sanction law. So if U.S. sanctions Chinese company, like recently, they passed a law in 2022, but it activated just a couple of weeks ago. They never used the law. Now it's active because U.S. has sanctioned 5 Chinese companies that did business with Iran for a long time, because Iran is a sanctioned country. They did business with Iran. Some are companies to handling money. Some are companies. Some are like they call teapots, like a smaller scale refineries to refine the oil arrived from Iran. Also, there are other companies in the process. The 5 of them. So China said, now because of this law, any company, Chinese or foreign companies, comply with U.S. sanctions against Chinese companies, will be sanctioned by us. Or the companies that are hurt can sue them. So that's another thing. Xi Jinping is trying to go independent, just like George Washington of the USA leading the revolution to gain their independence from an empire. What other things he's trying to do? He has BRICS, because, as I mentioned, China had gladly been part of U.S.-led institutions, international institutions. That's how China's control and is dependent on the U.S. But China's now established its alternative institution. BRICS is one. China has its own network, Belt and Road Initiative. So if U.S. try to choke China off, China have land, have a route on the landmass. They have their own trade partners. So that will alleviate at least the U.S. sanction or choke, physical naval blockade. Belt and Road Initiative and Made in China 2025 is to improve China industry, to improve China's brand and competitiveness and efficiency. And by most accounts, they have accomplished all they wanted to accomplish and more. They actually exceeded their goals. Yeah, that anti-sanction law is called blocking order. It's not in my note. U.S. started the trade war. Now China is fighting back on the trade war as well. If you remember, U.S. raised China's tariff rate. China will retaliate by comparable tariff rate, along with other trade barriers, like they will examine your goods more. If your good is imported goods to China is food, if I tighten down my examination on the port by the customs, maybe it's too long for your good to be sellable. It goes bad, or the value declines as time goes on. That sort of thing. Or you sanction my company, I sanction your company. So there's a lot of tit for tat. That's part of it, because China said, now we want independence. We don't want to be under U.S. thumb anymore. Now we graduate from being gladly part of U.S. institution and control, and their network, and U.S. dollar. Now we want it on our own. It's nothing personal, it's nothing against U.S. We just don't feel like being part of it. We want to be like an equal status in this world, coexist in the world on equal status. So Xi Jinping, his internal domestic measures and international policy, all pointing to his mission to make China independent from the U.S. So that led up to the summit in the past week, Wednesday, Thursday, in Beijing. So Donald Trump said, well, we've been fighting for a while, and I see what you're trying to do. So let's sit down and talk. We'll try other things. We try other things short of direct war between the two superpowers, which is neither side wanted it. So when you're tired of fighting, what do? You sit down and talk. That's what happened in Beijing, Wednesday and Thursday this week. So the U.S., what's critical in the U.S. is, I think you guessed it, is the reserve currency status of U.S. dollar. They cannot lose it. It's disastrous. Your retirement fund, your savings if U.S. loses its reserve currency status, U.S. dollar will depreciate greatly. And that means all our assets and all of your foreign assets, but your U.S. dollar-based assets will depreciate. And inflation probably will go up. So the prices are going up and your assets are going down. That sounds like a threat to the U.S., isn't it? Threat to each one of us, a pocketbook. So also the big deal is how do U.S. government, federal government, borrow more money? How do they handle the road to the next term when the current bonds expire? How do they do that? If the U.S. dollar ceases to be reserve currency, your bond yield, your bond will be worth less. The yield will be higher and pay higher interest rate. And you can't you can't sell as many. Meaning because when you sell bonds, especially to Federal Reserve, you're essentially printing money. You can't do that anymore without insurance, without inflation, because U.S. dollar is not in high demand because it is not a reserve currency. So there's a lot of problems. And the U.S. certainly can forget about being an empire. So what did they do? What did they do in Beijing this week? They brought, I'm telling you, they brought BlackRock, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, Visa, Citigroup, MasterCard, among the other companies, Elon Musk, other technology companies. But those are financial companies. They try to open China's financial market so they can sell bonds directly to Chinese citizens. Because currently, China still has pretty strict, their capital account is closed. They have capital control. Regular Chinese citizen is not able to exchange their renminbi, which is Chinese yuan, to US dollar. So see, China is dependent on US still. So if you're a Chinese citizen, if there's no such restriction, you will be glad at the drop of a hat, exchange your asset into US dollar and put it in US. Right? That's why China needs to maintain that control. But US, American government is saying, well, our budget deficit is like $39 trillion. All the countries, our citizens who are willing to buy federal bonds, they probably max out. They probably don't want to buy more because it's too much already. If it's too much, you don't want to buy more because next thing you know, maybe it's a bubble, the price will go down. You don't want to put more money in there. And more recently, I mean a year, probably at least, the government, foreign governments, Japan, Saudi Arabia, even Taiwan, and certainly Beijing, they are gradually reducing their holdings of the treasuries, probably to have gold instead. So they're maxed out too. And they see the risk of holding US dollar-based, denominated assets because you're also vulnerable, you're subject to US sanctions. And you don't want that. Look at what happened to Russia. You don't want that. So it's pretty much maxed out. So US government was like, shit, we have $39 trillion and when we have to pay like almost $2 trillion worth of interest every time all of those are due. So we got to find new sources. They go to China, in Beijing, this week. So they brought all the financial companies. Also, they have this stable coin. So if this stable coin, like Tether, is based on treasuries. Tether issue the coin, they have to have treasury in the back. So that essentially, if it go to China, China probably doesn't have to change the law. They just have to make new law. They say, we have the capital control, but we open to stable currency. We open to Tether, for example. So Chinese citizens, if you're a Chinese citizen, China is still dependent on the US in many, many ways. But this revolution just started. So you would be more than happy to buy US treasuries through the stablecoin, through Tether. I believe that's part of the agenda that they're talking about in Beijing. As time goes on, we may learn more about it. So the US is trying to find new avenue, new investors, new buyers for their treasuries, because it's just too consequential if the US dollar loses a reserve currency status. About 10 years ago, it was still like 65% or 62% of mid-60s% of the world reserve currencies was in US dollars. Now it's like high 50s, probably 59, 58. So it's not good. So I personally don't believe it'll collapse like that, but it will slide down gradually. And not as chaotic, but still not the kind of scenario that United States or the US citizens want to see. So my prediction is, if I make a prediction, the development track, like I said, China or Communist Party will not stop. They cannot afford to stop that track. And the independence track, I think China will eventually get its independence, so to speak, from the US. Because not because China is a threat, it's not a plus to the US empire, but the main threat of the US, the main cause that the US will have to yield their empire status is due to their overextension, also internal division and corruption. Those are just make opportunities for China to rise up, to pursue their independence. But China is not the cause. The cause is US, their own policy, overextension, division, and corruption. So I predict, of course, I don't have time frame, but eventually China will get there. People will maybe, some people will say, well, China has their own problem. China does have their own problem, because Xi Jinping right now, his emphasis, Xi Jinping is like a strong leader. He wants to make China strong, like what's it called, a China dream. As opposed to his opponents, his former premier is on the other side. He will take care of average Chinese person's income, their livelihood. But Xi Jinping was like, now it's kind of enough. We need to bolster the country's power. So he's on the demand, his economic-wise, policy-wise, he's on the supply side. We'll build the technology, we'll build the military, we'll build, and hopefully the demand will come up. If not, we'll export, we'll use other countries' demand. So he's on the supply side, build infrastructure, build this, build that, as opposed to make sure there's enough insurance or safety net or income for the restaurant owners or store owners and small companies. You want to build out the large companies, the flagship companies or the state-owned enterprises, the major ones. That's its orientation. And also, so that's partly explains why Chinese economy is struggling now. High unemployment rate, like 20% among the youths. And also the real estate market bust. Those are all downside risks in the Chinese economy, at least in the short term. But in the long term, I will bet on China's going independence. I think that's inevitable because China has the energy, the population has the energy. When you go to a country, people are willing to work harder because the recent painful, humiliating memory, collective memory, that drives people to work harder. And US doesn't have that. US has been very nice and sweet. So at this point, for Chinese people are more motivated. To me, energy is very important. And the Chinese Communist Party is able to select good policies because they have mechanism. If policy is wrong, they're willing to, their agility to be able to modify it, adjust it, or correct it, or just kill it. Because they're one party, they don't have to face the re-election, so they can, amid fall, they can make changes. So at the same time, the Western countries, like US, European countries, they have this crusader mentality. They want to spread the gospel of democracy. They want Chinese people to have more political rights. Well, I won't question their motive, but the downside for China is, if China adopted US or the US or Western European political system, they will not have the advantage that they have right now. They will have a lot of infight, although people have to fight the right, political right to infight, but that's not good for development. Chinese Communist Party is a perpetual development party. So you have, well, US has its own share of corruption as well. So I would expect Chinese government will have the cause to stop the political change or evolution the US way. But of course, they have their own internal pressure. When people have assets, when you make money, you want to be able to protect your assets. How do you protect your asset? You want to have rights, individual rights, political rights, so that you can protect your assets. So Chinese Communist Party will have to strike a balance. Somehow, you don't have to go with Western democracy kind of governance form. They can go in their way. But I expect them to strike a balance between political rights, people's political rights, and economic growth. So it is a threat, but it's just because China captures opportunity caused by US internal issues and overextension overseas. Thank you.
Thank you.